Richland High School, Class of 1989. Welcome to the official 35th Annual Reunion Podcast, where we talk all things reunion. And now, here's your host, Brian Kirk.
Hey, thank you, Devin, and welcome everyone to another episode of the Pre-Reunion Countdown. This is Brian Kirk, and today is May 11th, 2024. And guess what? We are only 10 weeks away from our 35th reunion. And hopefully you enjoyed our previous episode as much as I did when we heard from some of our fellow 89ers who went on to become teachers. So thank you again to Amy, Emily, and Angie for sharing your stories with us. And in today's episode, we sit down with another very special graduate of Richland High School, this one from the class of 66. We have best-selling author Sandra Brown. She's very special to many of us, especially for me because she attended high school with my favorite two people in the world, my parents. Yes, we'll ask her to share some memories from her years at Richland, find out how she got her start in writing, and find out what book she's currently working on. So, let's get started. Help me welcome Sandra Brown. Hello, Sandra.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. I saw your folks a couple of weeks ago. There was a luncheon gathering that they have had periodically, the ladies, and I've frankly never gone because it's I don't do lunch. I write through lunch usually, but it was on a day where I had to take part of the day off anyway, so it's going to be a day I could do something like that. So I went and I had the best time. And your mom and dad were both there. He went out on the patio and gave the dining table over to the group of ladies. But it was great to see them, as always. I mean, they're exactly the same they were when I knew them in high school. It's amazing.
Well, they're high school sweethearts. They met at Richland High School, and they're still together today. So it's definitely a great love story.
I mean, you can tell they're crazy about each other, which is tremendous.
Well, I miss seeing them all the time, and I'm definitely blessed to have them as my parents.
Where do you live?
I live just outside of Columbus, Ohio.
Okay.
And
I've been to Ohio. The most recent was in Dayton, and but I've been to Cincinnati, Cleveland. Trying to remember if I've ever been to Columbus. I'm not sure. When I'm on book tour, I just kind of know the hotel room, and the assembly, wherever I've got to be when. And I never get to really see much of the city. At Canton, I went to Canton. Isn't that where the NFL Hall of Fame is?
It is.
Yeah. Okay. I was in Canton last. That's where I was. And the only reason I remember is because as I was driving from the airport to the hotel, the driver pointed it out to me and he said, "You probably wouldn't be interested in that, but that's the NFL Hall of Fame." And I said, "Are you kidding?" I'm from Texas. I'm the biggest football fan ever.
That's right.
I have to go back sometime and go to the Hall of Fame there.
So right now you're actually calling in from South Carolina where you're writing a new book. That's a beautiful state.
Oh, I love it. I'm down in the very southern part. Hilton Head is, I fly into Savannah, Georgia, but once you cross the Savannah River, you're in South Carolina. And from the Savannah airport to my house on Hilton Head is about an hour and 15-minute drive, depending on the traffic. But it's low country. I mean, it is just gorgeous here. And I've had a house here for a long time. I love it, but it's a great place to come and write. The view out my window here is very nice. And it's a big, old, rambling house. But my family loves it. But then I love my time here alone, too, because I can then really just, my life shuts down. I don't have any appointments. I don't, all I do is write. And so when I really have to concentrate on either plotting the book or finishing the book, I come down here by myself and just stare out the window and try to think.
Oh, what a great view for gathering inspiration. Now, in a moment, we're going to talk about the book you're currently working on. But before we do that, let's go back in time to your years at Richland. Tell us about some of the memories you have. What are some of the things you did when you were in high school?
Oh, well, a big part of it, too, actually. A big part of it was in drama. I always took a drama and speech for my electives. And I was very active in the productions, that we did, especially my junior year. I had a lead role in Bye Bye Birdie, and I, loved that. And I think it helped prepare me for. I mean, I do a lot of public speaking now, and you ask someone one of their number one fears, and getting in front of people and talking is a common, fear. And of course, that has never been a problem for me. And so I really enjoy the public speaking aspect of my work, because a lot of writers do not enjoy it all. Writers are typically very introverted, and but so drama, speech, all of that, and then the Dixie Bells. It was instituted my junior year, and I tried out for it, and I was made a lieutenant, which only meant that you marched in front of the line behind you. But anyway, I loved the dance aspect of that. And I used those things to my experiences doing both of those things to get a role in the Southern Palace at Six Flags after my freshman year at TCU. So the summer between my freshman and sophomore years, I was in the stage show at Six Flags. And so my training in high school contributed to that, certainly. And then I went on to do other stage work, community theater kind of stuff. And then ultimately, and this goes back, oh my gosh, so many years, Brian, I'm embarrassed, but you know how long it's been.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
But I started working for television in Tyler, Texas. My husband and I lived there. We had our 2 children there, and he was an anchor man on the local station in Tyler. And they asked me one day, would you be interested in doing some things? And I said, oh gosh, I'd love it. And I had, babies, but it was like something that I could do once or twice a week. And I loved it, loved that outlet. And then he got a job at Channel 8 in Dallas, and we moved to Dallas. And same thing, after I'd been there, after he had been established for about a year, there were some openings there. And so I did work on Channel 8 again on a part-time basis. So I was always kind of attached, to media, broadcast media, and being in front of an audience by, one way or another. And of course, now I'm less seen. I have a reading audience instead. So,
in our last episode, we paid tribute to all of our teachers. We talked to 3 of our fellow 89ers who became teachers, and we talked about all the great teachers that inspired us. Do you have any teachers that you remember? Maybe some teachers who had a great impact on your journey to be an author.
One teacher really stood out in terms of preparation for what I do now. And of course, I loved all the literature classes and, reading Romeo and Juliet, and everything was right up my alley. And, but I had an English teacher, can't remember her first name. I think it was Carol, but her last name was Miss Moore, and it was MISS, Miss Moore. And she was young. Probably this was her first or second, maybe, year of teaching. But I had her, I believe it was either either, because we only went 3 years. It was either my sophomore or junior year. But she taught our class the parts of speech. And up until that class, I didn't even know what that meant. But what it does mean is it was nouns, pronouns, adjective, adverb. What is the classification of that particular word? And I remember for everyone else, it was just, they were hating it. But I learned so much from her. And I remember our final was a paragraph, probably about 5 lines of typewritten. That day it was mimeographed, but we had to go through the paragraph and above each word, say what part of speech it was. And that was our final. And I think I made like a 98 or 99 on it. But it wasn't hard for me. It was more like a puzzle. And I love to diagram sentences. And I appreciate Miss Moore, and I lost contact with her. I don't know even if she ever taught at Richland again. I don't recall her being there later on. That's why I think I probably had her like my sophomore year. But she taught me so much, and to this day, if I'm working on something, I go, okay, what's the antecedent of that pronoun? And I know these words and these things because Miss Moore taught them to me. And you ask, what's the antecedent of that pronoun to a lot of people, and they go, I don't know what you just said. So it is something that writers do need to know. But Miss Moore taught it to me.
Teachers, I'm sure they probably think the best of their students, hope for the best for their futures, but I'm sure she would be proud to know that she had a best-selling author right there in her class.
Well, I was very grateful for her later on. And then I had Mr. Mosley for English and Spanish, and loved him. He came to several of our class reunions, and he was just a charming man, and very sweet. I think he saw potential in several of us, but certainly not. And he did know. The last time I saw him, he was well aware that I had gone on to be published, and he was very proud.
I remember looking at my parents' yearbook and seeing all the different teachers, and there was a young teacher there, and I go, wait a minute, that's Mr. Sessions. He's still teaching at Richland.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Sessions. He's taught science, correct?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and I never actually had Mr. Sessions. I don't believe, because science was not my thing. And I took biology or whatever we had to take. I remember dissecting, a frog or something. Science was never my thing, so it certainly wasn't one of the things that I pursued. I fulfilled my requirements, and that was it. But I definitely was acquainted with Mr. Sessions, and I saw him later. I think I went back, and I had nieces and nephews that went through Richland, so I would go back for their plays or, something. And sometimes I would run into a teacher that I knew. And I remember seeing Mr. Sessions at one of those.
Mm-hmm. Everybody loved having him as the teacher, I think. And then in a recent podcast we did with another Richland High School, I think he graduated a different year from you, but do you remember Gary Morris?
Oh, yeah, sure. Gary was in Bye Bye Birdie with me. I played Rosie, who was kind of what would be the adult lead, and he played Birdie, who would have been kind of he was the namesake, but he was awesome. So yeah, well acquainted with him. But I remember him and his twin Carrie from elementary school. So we had gone back a long way. He was a grade behind me. Okay. He was a year younger. Yeah. He was a year younger. We did Birdie, as I said, my junior year. He was a sophomore that year. He was awesome. even then, he was awesome.
And episode 3 of these podcasts, Gary told a story about the teacher he had at the time, and I think she gave him a failing grade because she didn't think he actually wrote the poem. She thought he plagiarized it, and it was Kay Granger was the teacher.
Yeah. Well, if anybody's smart enough to detect something plagiarized, it would be she. She wasn't there when I was there, I don't believe, but my sister, one of my sisters, I have 4 younger sisters. One of my sisters had her, and they became really, really close in a teacher-pupil, relationship. And so I met Kay through my sister years and years later. And of course, since she's become a congresswoman, I've seen her on many occasions at different things, and we always say hello.
I remember you saying that you're a big fan of movies, and some of the movies showing on the big screen when you were in high school were The Good, Bad, and the Ugly, Alfie, Hawaii, A Man for All Seasons, The Sand Pebbles. Do any movies stand out to you?
All of that. I remember going to see My Fair Lady. I remember going to see, of course, that'd be right up my alley because of it was a musical. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Zhivago was big for me. All of these, were romances. And that was what I started writing. And I had been advised by a published author in the area. I had the nerve, can't believe I did, but I had the nerve to contact her. And she was very helpful. She said, I'll read what you've written if you want me to. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not a real writer, which is what you always say. I still say that. But so she read the story I'd written, and she said, you have a great a voice, and it's clear that you can tell a story. You just need to learn how to format it. And so she suggested some how to write fiction books to me, and I took them on as textbooks and studied plot structure and conflict and so on and so on and so on, character development, and applied what she advised me and what I'd learned through that. And about a year later, submitted a manuscript, and it got sold. So, but that's where I started. But what she had said was, you should be writing romances. And I said, what's that? Like what? And she said, well, like a Harlequin romance. And I had never read one. I always read these, adventure novels and everything. But so I went to the drugstore at the book section, and they had 5 or 6 Harlequins, lined up. And so I bought all of them and took them home and started reading them. And I thought, yeah, I could do this, I think. And so that's when I started. And so the first 45 books I wrote were bona fide romances. And by the end of it, the first editor that bought my first book wound up buying 5, and then another publishing house came to me and said, would you write for us under a different name? And I said, okay. And then another house, and so by the time I switched to, more suspense and mystery thriller kind of writing, I had written 45 romances under 4 different names. So I really, cut my teeth in all that genre, but it was what I love, and I still love it. I still love them. They're life affirming, and I don't like to read dreary fiction. I want to write things where there's the potential of a happy ending, at least.
So do you think by growing up and living in Texas, has that shaped anything in your writing style or some of your stories? I mean, one thing that I can definitely appreciate now by living in Ohio and looking back at my years in Texas, Texans have a certain pride to them, a certain lifestyle that's very unique to the state, to other regions.
Well, we're thoroughly obnoxious.
A little bit.
No, there's a regional pride. And my son lived for a long time in New York, 25 years. He went straight from film school at OU to New York. And just 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, came back to Fort Worth. But he never really left Texas. And no, we have a regional pride, I think, that is unsurpassed and unlike any place else, but everybody in the world knows us. I mean, that's the thing. Many times when I've been overseas and someone says, now, where are you from? I'll go Texas, because it's just, and we have such a rich and colorful heritage. And I've been asked many times, has that contributed to your, penchant for storytelling? And I said, well, absolutely. I said, look at the characters that we have to draw from, historically and contemporary. I said, we're in a way a breed apart, I think.
So outside of writing, what other things are you passionate about?
My friends, my family, my kids, my grandkids. I have 4 grandsons, and my daughter has 3, and then my son has the 1. And they're awesome. I don't have a hobby, because I don't like anything as much as I like reading and writing. And so it makes me sound very dull. But I used to love movies. Now I love old movies because those that you named a few minutes ago, they just don't make them like that anymore. And I miss that, because we were all, my family, and I'm talking about my extended, my parents took my little sisters and me to the drive-ins, and we would see a double feature. This was like a Friday night, tradition. And then when I married and had my kids, it was the same thing. We couldn't wait to look in the newspaper on a Friday morning and find out what movies were opening, and choose one. And now it's just not like that anymore. And even going to the theater isn't, the experience that it used to be. So I miss that. So I watch a lot of movies on TV. But I love, going out with my friends and doing travel. I love to travel. Haven't done a lot since COVID. That kind of curtailed, travel plans for 2 years. And I haven't been. The last place I went to and I loved it was Scotland. And I loved that. So I think I'm going to go back this fall. One of my sisters is going over there to work for a year, and she wants me to come over there and join her for a time. So I might do that.
That sounds great, just to kind of get away, unplug. And speaking of that, in some of our previous episodes, some of our classmates have been talking about how great high school was for a lot of reasons, but for one reason, because we didn't have smartphones like kids have today, and we were able to connect with those around us. But in terms of stories or movies that are made today, a lot of them are set in a time period when there wasn't the technology of smartphones. So if something, goes bump in the night, or you're out in the on a long road trip with that, gas in the car, you kind of had to do some things on your own without your phone. And
survival, right. That has all really kind of ruined fiction. It's hard to make someone disappear or have someone disappear, because everybody's in touch with everybody. The bad guys are easily found. But then they're not. Every time there's, something like a prison escape or something, as someone goes missing, and it takes, sometimes weeks. And usually the ending to finding them is not good. But it does still happen where people can vanish. And so that intrigues me, but it's made writing about that really difficult. And I go back now every once in a while, just if I'm having a bad day, and I'll go, I know how to do this. I know how to do this. I've done this 85 times. Why is it still so hard? But I'll go and just pull a book off the shelf and open it up and start reading it. And I will not remember having written it. I will know what the basic story is, but I won't, and I'll get to the end of the chapter and go, wonder what happens next, and I'll find myself turning the pages. And it's funny to see things like one of the hardships, one of the conflicts would be finding a phone booth, that worked. And so, that doesn't happen. It'd be like Superman, searching for a phone booth. Well, of course, that doesn't happen anymore. So it's harder now with technology, I think. And that's why I enjoyed. I wrote a book. It was actually in 2020 because I was stuck here in Hilton Head, couldn't get home. And I was sick of hearing about it on the news. It was in the early part of the year, and I'd finished my book. I thought, I've got to write about something else. And thought, I just don't want to write anything where everyone's in a mask. And, we didn't know what was going to happen at that point. This was early in the days of COVID. And I thought, what was happening 100 years ago? And so what was happening in 1920? Well, there was a global pandemic.
Oh, the Spanish flu.
The Spanish flu. Soldiers were coming home from World War I with post-traumatic stress, although they didn't have a name for it then, and Prohibition. So I knew that my editor might be resistant to my writing a historical. And so I went into it by saying, guess what was happening in 1920? And so I tied in even the Me movement. I tied in the Me movement to women's suffrage. That was the year that, we got the vote. So I said, so we had a Me Too movement. We had a global pandemic. It was post-war, and soldiers were sick and nobody knew why. And not only that, you couldn't get a drink. And so I said, I want to write about Prohibition, or set it in that time. And so I wrote about moonshiners in Texas. And it was so much fun because I didn't have to worry about cell phones and TV and, all of those things. I had to learn how to start a Model T car. But it was fun. It was a great departure, just, to get away from our world where everyone's so insulated, and you had to depend on other people on a one-on-one, face-to-face basis. It couldn't be, a cell phone call.
No. And I learned that when you wrote the book Smash Cut, you did a lot of research on movies, which you're already a big movie fan, movie buff already. And a lot of movies and even TV shows, some of them follow the life of an author, like Murder, She Wrote, or Romancing the Stone, Saving Mr. Banks, Shakespeare in Love. And then recently,
I love Shakespeare in Love. That's one of my favorite movies ever. I just love it.
And then recently there was the movie American Fiction about the author. And
I have not seen that. I know it was nominated for an Academy Award, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's really great.
Yeah. I'll have to check that out.
I know that these are mostly fictional depictions, but is there any truth to the fascinating life that authors may have in movies?
Well, I really love Shakespeare in Love because of all of the subtle references and how he, would hear something and then go back and use those words and things like that, and how he was kind of driven to write the story. But in my experience, and I can only speak to my experience, I've never written anything about me or that paralleled my life, and nor really the life of anyone that I know, because most people I know are pretty normal. And that doesn't make for an interesting character. And so, or at least not interesting to me. So, I'm looking around at my, neighbors on both sides, and they have their work, they have their kids or grandkids, they have their jobs, or they're retired, they pay their taxes, they go to church, they're voting citizens, da 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 da. Well, now, if you found somebody chopped up and one of them's deep freeze, that would make them interesting. so it's like a frequently asked question, Brian, is, have you ever based a story on anything that happened to you? And good grief, no. I mean, I'm a card carrying coward. So the people in my book do things a whole lot with a whole lot more courage than I would. But I did base the story on an event that occurred in my dad's life when he was 6 years old. It was 1934, the height of the Depression. And my paternal grandfather owned a dairy farm. And he was giving away the surplus milk that he could not sell to the large dairies for he supplied dairies with their milk, was one of many, but he inevitably had surplus, and he was taking it to a shanty town. This is in Central Texas, and federal agents came and said, "Mr. Cox, you can't give that away. We want to create a false demand for commodities like milk and eggs and beef and chicken and whatever. So you have to pour your surplus out." And he was very feisty, and it was blankety blank, 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 blank. And it resulted in an armed standoff between my grandfather and the federal agents and all of my, cousins and whatever, however they related, who my grandpa was letting work on the farm just for food. It was kind of tense. Now, my dad was 6 years old, so naturally this made a strong impression on him. And he was a writer. He was an editorial writer for the Star Telegram. And he wrote about this later in life. And I was like fascinated. I said, "Daddy, I never knew this story. This is awesome." Because ultimately, to my knowledge, no guns were ever fired. Nobody was ever hurt. But the agents just went away, and Grandpa continued to take his surplus milk to the shanty town. But it was it stuck in my mind. So I wrote a book, I think it was in 2008, called Rainwater. Totally different from anything that I've written. I didn't even tell my agent that I was writing it. I worked on it between contract books that were supposed to be, thrillers, mystery, suspense novels. And it was a quiet little story about a woman who owned a boarding house and a Mr. Rainwater who comes to stay with her. And a similar incident happens where they slaughter cattle. They had to drive them into a pit and shoot them because they couldn't feed them. And so that was the only story I ever based on an event that, was nonfiction that I knew by extension had happened to someone close to me.
What you're describing there makes me think of an assignment. Many of our listeners are probably thinking the same thing. When our teacher asked us to interview the oldest living person in our family. And at that time, I went to my great-grandfather and asked him about life, what it was like growing up in the mid-cities. And of course, he was originally from, I think, Haltom City and that area around what was to be called North Richland Hills. He talked about knowing this gentleman named Rufus Snow, which Rufus Snow comes from, or delivering milk to Mrs. Baird, not the bakery, but actually Mrs. Baird. So,
right. There was another book. I was talking about the historical I wrote. Another term for speakeasy is blind tiger. And in my research, when I was researching the moonshining and the prohibition and everything, I came across that term. I thought, God, that'd look great on a cover. A blind tiger. I mean, I could just see it. And the first chapter of that was actually after my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, and she told a story about they lived in by Denison. And it was frigid cold. And my grandpa did not have a job. They had a baby. He was a nursing infant, my uncle. And they struck out in an open air Model T, which is all they had. And they drove from there to Lorena, south of Waco, just off 35.
Mm-hmm.
And they were looking for my great-grandfather's. It was a shack that he lived in. And my grandmother said they got there in the middle of the night. They were frozen to death. And this shack had newspaper lining the walls to keep the wind out of the cracks. But she said we went in there and he had a pot-bellied stove and a wood burning stove to cook on. And he had fried a rabbit and had made biscuits, and with the rabbit had made gravy. And she said that was the best meal I ever had in my life. And I remembered that. And that's how I started Blind Tiger, was with the story of them driving all the way from Denison. It took hours and hours, of course. There were no superhighways at the time. But I thought that, when I remember her telling that story, I would listen to all these stories, that they told. I loved it. So storytelling was always very integral to my entertainment. I love to hear stories. I love to listen to stories all my life. And my mother was an avid reader, and she would read to my sisters and me. I remember her reading like Jane Eyre and things like that were even at that point in time classics. But, I think it helped nurture my imagination. And I still have this, very active fantasy life, always hearing conversations. And I had imaginary friends when I was little, so totally psychotic. But I think you kind of have to be to do this job,
So when you're reading a book, or maybe even watching a movie with a plot twist or it's a mystery, are you able to figure out who done it before others can?
Sometimes, and I get really mad if I do. I spoil the surprise for myself, and I love that surprise. And I commend an author, that can totally draw me into a book, and where I'm not kind of grading the paper, that I don't notice a misplaced adjective, or that I don't, I think, well, that verb should have gone here, not there, to make a better sentence, So if I can get drawn into the story, I love the author for being able to do that. But I remember one movie where, and I knew it was coming. Two movies, I knew it was coming. One was Sixth Sense. Do you remember that? I
do. It's Bruce Willis and
Toni Collette.
Mm.
And I remember everybody was, at the end just gasping. And I knew within 3 minutes into the movie, he's dead.
Oh, no.
You don't recover from a bullet wound like that. And so it was like, he's dead. And I watched this whole movie, and the little boy saying, "I see dead people." And I'm like, yeah, but I sat there and watched the whole movie. So I figured that out immediately. And then another one I remember was Jagged Edge. And I remember going with my son and daughter one Saturday afternoon, and because I love Lloyd Bridges, and I thought, oh, this will be great. Well, he was the bad guy. But I remember after they had slept together, and she's making the bed up, and she goes over to the closet and she reaches, and I said, "There's the typewriter." And everybody around looked at me, and sure enough, she moved the sheets, and there was the typewriter. And that had given away, who was typing the letters to her. So those are two that I remember going, oh, yeah, this is, But another book that or movie that I could kind of relate to was Misery. And I remember seeing that and people talking about, oh my God, how scary was Kathy Bates, and it was just awful. The whole thing, what you could see, but the misery wasn't her. The misery was what he was going through mentally, and when someone asked me, they said, what part, really scared you? And I said, when she made him burn his manuscript. And they, well, that wasn't scary. I said, oh, yeah, it was. It was really scary because she was the embodiment of what every author, at least this author, what every author feels every day is that you've got to sit down at a blank page and you've got to create something from nothing. And the pressure that you feel. And so she was like an allegory of that. She was the embodiment, the personification of that terror, that misery of sitting down and doing it. And so I live with that every day. It's like a wall of fear that you have to climb every day. Will I ever know another story? Will I ever be able to put two sentences together? Will anybody want to read this? And he was a very successful author in the book, but he still went through that terror. And when she kept saying, this is not good enough, this is not your best, you've got to go back and start over. I mean, it's every writer's nightmare. So I could really relate to that one.
There's another movie reference too. In the movie Love Actually, there's a storyline about an author who's writing a book. I think it's played by British actor Colin Firth. And as he's out on sabbatical in this lake cabin, he's got this beautiful caretaker helping him out with the cabin. She doesn't speak English.
I was just thinking about that scene the other day because something I heard reminded me of when he's walking through the town and all the people are following him and he walks into the restaurant and oh, I know what it was, where he says, you learn English. And she said, just in cases. And I had typed the sentence, just in case. And I thought, oh, just in cases, and it reminded me of that. I adore that scene. That was my favorite story within the movie, was their story. I loved that.
And there's, of course, the scene when he's outside typing near the water and she takes off the paperweight and this whole draft just takes off in the air. The draft flies in the air and goes into the water and she jumps in to help rescue the pieces.
And she says, and she says, is it scary? And he said, yes, mostly how scary. It's scary how bad the writing is. So, yeah, I identify with all of those.
Are you working on something now that you're excited about?
I'm about to finish, actually. As soon as we wrap up here, I will open up chapter, I think I'm on chapter 31 today, and there are 39 chapters. So I'm very near the end, but this is my second-ish kind of third draft. So this is where I take, the story's been there for several weeks, but I mean, I had the first draft written, but this is the draft where I take apart every single scene and milk it for all it's worth. I rewrite practically every sentence. Did I do it? I rarely do it right the first time, or at least I could send in my first draft and it would be okay, but it wouldn't be okay with me. And so I go back and I go through these little exercises with myself. Okay, does this move the story along? Or is this a self-indulgent scene you just wanted to write? How does it propel the story forward? And then I go through several, as I say, just several exercises? Are the verbs vivid verbs? Are they the precise verb? Do they have impact, or are they passive? Don't want it passive, especially if it's an action scene. You want to have the verb that has the most punch. So do all that. And then I go through the 3 questions that I learned from David Mamet, the screenwriter, playwright. He said, in every scene, it should be, what does the character want? What happens if he doesn't get it? And why now? And I go through those 3 things. So put the character, whoever point of view I'm writing from in a scene, what's their goal in this scene? What do they want? What are the consequences if it doesn't happen? And why now? It can't be something they can delay until tomorrow or even an hour. It's got to be right now. And that keeps the clock, ticking. I can't divulge the title yet. I have it, but we usually, my publisher and my marketing people and I usually set a date, where we're going to do a title reveal. And then after about 6 weeks after that, we do a cover reveal. And then I'll post something on my website that tells about the backstory of the book. Why did I come up with this idea? Why did I write it? What the first idea I had about it? How did it spring to life? That kind of thing. It's kind of an author's note on how it came about. And so then I'll post that. So all in, trying to build up anticipation. So
as you start working on the next book, I have a question for you for inspiration. Our 35th reunion's coming up soon, and I know you've been to a few reunions yourself. Sometimes there's a connection that can happen between 2 people, or some kind of a story that could maybe occur because of the reunion. Have you ever thought about making a storyline or some kind of a character that could be generated as a result of someone going to the reunion or meeting somebody at the reunion?
Well, all of the angst of, inherent to adolescence and cliques and, all of that. I think it's gone, and you're really seeing someone in an entirely new light, and why didn't I know this person? They're fascinating or interesting or funny or, whatever. So hopefully we don't remain in the bubble that, like junior high and high school, that we do expand our minds a little bit beyond that. I have to say that it's been interesting and funny because single friends who have lost their spouse by one way or another and have found a new relationship revert to absolute stupidity. I mean, it's so funny to watch these, 60-somethings or 70-somethings get giggly and nervous about, do you think he's thinking about me? Do you think he'll call? Do you think I should call him? And it's like, what are we, at the locker in 7th grade? It sounds exactly the same. So I guess there is that element that when it comes to some things, we never grow up.
Well, Sandra, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a great episode. We really enjoyed hearing from you.
And, I was a chatterbox. See, when you do get a writer that starts talking about their way, then you can't shut them up.
No, we enjoyed every moment. Thank you so much.
So this has been a treat, Brian. And again, thank you so much for your interest. I appreciate it greatly.
Absolutely. It's been an honor to talk to you today. Thank you so much. And best of luck with this new book. And we'll hear more about it in the months ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. And y'all have a great reunion.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
And speaking of that reunion, it's coming up July 20th. I cannot wait to see each and every one of you there. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be at the Hearsay Speakeasy at the old ballpark in Arlington on July 20th. Make sure you get your tickets. I'm going to put the link to the ticket purchase site, which is PayPal, in the description of this podcast. Make sure you subscribe or follow this podcast on YouTube, iHeartMedia, Spotify, and Apple so you don't miss a single episode. These are a lot of fun. And before I close the show, it's Mother's Day this weekend. Please make sure you show all the moms in your life the love they truly deserve. And on a personal note, Mom, I'm not going to get to see you this year. I'm still here in Ohio, but I promise you when I come in town for the reunion, I will stop by and I'll give you a big hug. I love you. Until next time, for the Pre-Reunion Countdown podcast, this is Brian Kirk.